Hi, I'm Mia, I'm 23 now, but when I was 16, my parents handed me a rent contract for $600 a month. 600. At 16. Either I signed it, or I had a week to leave their house. To be fair, the warning signs were there long before that moment. My mother always said things like, "We believe in independence early," as if neglect was some kind of parenting philosophy. She told people that teaching me to stand on my own 2 feet would make me strong. What it really did was make me terrified of asking for help. When I turned 12, she stopped buying my school lunches. I remember standing in the kitchen, holding a permission slip for a field trip, and hearing her say, "Now that you're 12, you can buy your own food. We're not made of money, and it's time you understood what hard work means." That was the year she stopped buying me notebooks and pencils, too. I asked for new ones just once, and she told me, "Other kids your age have jobs. Maybe it's time you get one too." At the time, I didn't even know where to start. But the next week, I saw a flyer on the library bulletin board, dog walking $10 per hour. I called the number on the library phone, pretending I was older, and somehow got the job. That $10 an hour became the only money I could count on. My dad would watch me come home tired from walking dogs and smirk. "Look at our little entrepreneur," he'd say. "Now you get why we can't just give you everything you want." I'd smile like it was a joke, while mentally calculating how to stretch $25 into lunches, deodorant, and a thrift store shirt for the week. By 13, they'd stopped feeding me dinner. They'd order takeout for themselves and tell me to make a sandwich or something. Sometimes I'd hide in my room, waiting for the smell of their Chinese food to fade before sneaking out to make peanut butter on stale bread. I told myself this was normal. I even started saying things like, "Oh, I'm not that hungry," around friends so they wouldn't notice. But I wasn't lazy. I found work wherever I could, babysitting, mowing lawns, cleaning garages, and slowly built a small side business in the neighborhood. Every dollar went toward things they refused to buy: clothes, school materials, shampoo. Meanwhile, my dad had a premium cable sports package that cost more per month than my entire grocery budget. He bragged to his friends about his self-sufficient daughter, calling me proof that tough love works. If they only knew that tough love meant their teenage daughter hiding crackers in her backpack to survive the school day. By 15, I had over $1,000 saved, money I guarded like it was life or death. It was supposed to be my college fund, my ticket out. But then Dad lost his job. The house turned sour overnight. Bills piled up, arguments got louder, and I learned quickly that when my parents were desperate, they looked at me like I was an ATM with legs. One night, Mom came into my room holding a grocery list. "Mia, honey, things are tight right now. Do you think you could help out? Just a little for food?" I stared at her. "You mean pay for my own groceries? Like I've been doing since I was 12? Her face twitched. That was different. That was teaching responsibility. "This is an emergency." Dad joined in. "You've got savings, don't you? We're family, Mia. Family helps each other." It took everything in me not to laugh. "When I was hungry, you said it was character building." His voice turned sharp. "Watch your tone. You should be grateful we let you live here for free." For free. That's what he called a roof over the head of the child they refused to feed. That was the night I started looking up whether parents could legally charge their underage child rent. What I found both terrified and empowered me. Because the law said what my parents were doing wasn't just cruel, it might actually be illegal. I didn't know then that a single phone call would soon change everything. The next morning, I walked into the kitchen and found the rent contract on the table. It was printed on thick paper with official-looking margins and bold text across the top: residential agreement. Dad was eating scrambled eggs. Mom had that fake smile she used when she was about to say something awful and tried to make it sound reasonable. "You're 16 now," she said, "and you earn money. We think it's only fair you start contributing to the household." I stared at the document. $600 a month. Plus utilities. Dad added, sliding the paper closer to me like he was doing me a favor. "You've got your little business. It's time to be responsible." I did the math in my head again. In a good month, my lawn care and dog walking side hustle brought in maybe $700. Subtract $200 for utilities in the summer, that left me with $100 for food, clothes, gas for the mower, and school supplies. Barely enough to survive. Forget saving. I told them I needed to think about it. Dad's smile dropped. "There's nothing to think about. If you live here, you help pay." Simple. Let her think, Mom said, though her voice had an edge. I took the contract and walked to my room. My hands shook as I shut the door. I pulled out my notebook where I tracked every dollar I earned and spent. I'd started it when I was 13 after a teacher handed me a free notebook and said quietly, "If you need more supplies, just ask." That moment, having someone notice, was what started the habit. The numbers didn't lie. If I signed this, I'd be broke in 2 months. And once that happened, they'd either kick me out or say I was too lazy to pull my weight. That night I barely slept. I sat in bed reading articles, forums, anything about parental obligations. I wasn't looking for revenge, I just wanted to know if I was crazy. If I was being spoiled like Dad claimed. Turns out I wasn't. There were laws. Not clear-cut ones, not everywhere, but enough to make a point. Parents are legally responsible for providing their kids with food, clothing, and shelter until they turn 18. Charging rent could be okay if they were still providing the basics. But mine weren't. Not even close. I started saving screenshots. I created a folder called Proof, buried under layers of innocuous names like homework_algebra 2, so they wouldn't stumble on it. The next morning, I walked to school early and asked to speak with the counselor, Mrs. Carter. I'd only talked to her once before, in passing, but she'd smiled at me like she actually saw me, not like I was some background character in her day. She led me into her office, a warm little room with plants on the window and a soft couch. I sat down and didn't speak for a full minute. I didn't cry. I wasn't even sure what to say. But once I started talking, I couldn't stop. I told her everything: how my parents stopped buying food when I was 12, how I paid for my own supplies, how they ordered takeout while I lived off peanut butter, how they'd now given me a rent contract like I was a tenant in their home. Mrs. Carter just listened. No interruptions, no judgment. When I finished, she asked softly, "Do you feel safe at home, Mia?" I nodded slowly. "They don't hit me. They don't yell unless I say no. They just stop being parents." She took notes. Then she handed me a list of free legal aid resources and asked if I'd be okay with her making some calls. "Yes," I whispered. "Please. I don't know what else to do." That was the first time I felt like I wasn't completely alone. By the end of that day, I had a meeting scheduled with a lawyer. A real lawyer. Someone who could tell me whether what my parents were doing was just unfair, or something worse. What I didn't realize was how quickly everything would start to change once that letter arrived. Daniel Lawson from Legal Aid looked nothing like I expected. He was in his early 30s, clean-cut, with glasses and a calm voice that didn't rush me. His office was cramped, papers everywhere, a filing cabinet that wouldn't quite close, but when I sat down and told him everything, he listened like none of it was weird. That, in itself, was surreal. I laid it all out: how I'd been paying for my food, clothes, school stuff since I was 12, how my parents were now demanding rent while still refusing to provide basic necessities. I showed him the contract, my budget notebook, photos of the empty cabinets, screenshots of the bank charges for their takeout and streaming subscriptions. Daniel looked over the evidence, then leaned back in his chair and said words I'll never forget. "This is not okay. Not legally. Not ethically." He explained that while it's not illegal for parents to ask for rent from a working teen, it is illegal to neglect their basic duties, especially if the child is a minor, still in school, and they're not providing for her. They're essentially trying to profit off of you while still benefiting from being your legal guardians. He said, "That's not just morally wrong, it could be considered neglect." He offered to send them a letter. Not threatening, but firm. Something that clearly laid out their legal obligations and warned them that charging rent under these conditions could land them in serious trouble. I said yes immediately. 3 days later it arrived. I wasn't there when they opened it. I came home from school and knew something had shifted the second I walked in the door. They were sitting at the kitchen table, staring at a single envelope. Their faces were pale, tight in that way adults get when they realize someone else is in control now. No one spoke. I grabbed something from the fridge, finally stocked with food, as if they knew someone might check, and went straight to my room. For the next 2 days, they barely spoke to me. Mom moved around the house like a ghost, slamming drawers and wiping down spotless counters. Dad went through his mail like it personally offended him. Then, Saturday night, while I was heating up ramen, it happened. Dad stomped into the kitchen and slammed his coffee mug on the counter. "You talked to a lawyer?" I nodded. Calm. My heart wasn't, but I'd practiced this. "You trying to ruin us? Make us look like bad parents? Is that it?" I didn't flinch. I just wanted someone to explain my rights. Because I'm 16. And I've been paying for everything myself for 4 years. You gave me a rent contract, Dad. Mom jumped in, her voice high and brittle. You're ungrateful. We gave you a place to live. A roof over your head. You could have been out on the street. You mean like you threatened last week? I said quietly. That shut them up. Dad leaned in, face red. We were trying to teach you responsibility. You've always thought you're smarter than us, haven't you? Now you're going around crying to strangers, making us look like monsters. I swallowed. My throat felt tight. I didn't say anything that wasn't true. He pointed at the microwave, at my bowl of noodles. You're eating, aren't you? We feed you. Because someone told you that you legally have to. Silence. That's when I knew. It wasn't about money. It had never really been about money. It was about control. They weren't just mad that I'd gone to legal aid. They were mad that they weren't the ones holding all the power anymore. But I held the letter now. And even though it wasn't a court order or some magical shield, it was something. It said, you don't get to rewrite reality. That night, I messaged Mrs. Carter. Told her what happened. She wrote back immediately. You did the right thing. I'm here if you need me. For the first time in years, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the one in the wrong. But that letter? It was only the beginning. The week after the letter, the house got eerily quiet. Not peaceful, tense. My parents weren't yelling anymore, but they weren't speaking either. Not to me. Not to each other unless it was clipped, transactional stuff like, pass the salt. Or, did you pay the electric? And me? I became a ghost in my own house. I woke up earlier to avoid them in the kitchen. I did my laundry late at night. I ate when they were out or locked in their room. Every step I took felt like it echoed too loudly. Mrs. Carter checked in with me every day at school. She brought me into her office during lunch and started helping me map out a schedule so I didn't collapse under the pressure of school, work, and surviving my own parents. She noticed my grades had dipped in 2 classes. Not because I wasn't smart, but because I was always tired. She helped me contact my teachers, who gave me extensions and access to the school's free tutoring program. We made a spreadsheet together like a real one. Color-coded blocks for classes, job shifts, study time, and even mandatory rest. She printed it out and taped one to her office wall. This is your backup plan, she told me, pointing at it. So when everything else is chaos, this is where your structure lives. Meanwhile, outside of school, things got weirder. Mrs. Parker, my neighbor, noticed me hauling my lawn equipment into her garage more often. One day she came outside, wiped her hands on her gardening gloves, and just asked, "Is everything okay at home?" I lied. Obviously. Gave her the usual vague, "Just tight financially." She didn't push. But she looked at me for a long moment and then said, "You can keep your mower here full-time if you want. There's space. That way it doesn't get misplaced." She didn't have to say more. I got the message. The next day, she gave me extra work weekly lawn care instead of bi-weekly and paid me for the full month in advance. I nearly cried. A few days later, while I was organizing my tools in her garage, she came out with lemonade and said, "Guest room's empty, just so you know. If you ever need to crash." She said it light, like a casual offer. But her eyes weren't casual. Back home, my parents started locking the pantry. Literally. They put a padlock on it. They claimed it was to better organize the groceries. But they also told me which shelves in the fridge I could and couldn't touch. It wasn't illegal technically. They weren't denying me food outright. They just made it clear that it was theirs, and I could have some if I played by the rules. Which I didn't. I started taking photos. Of everything. Locked pantry? Snap. My dinner of toast and peanut butter next to their empty Chinese containers? Snap. Dad's sports subscription renewal email? Snap. The receipt Mom left out from a $120 Target spree while claiming they couldn't afford groceries? Snap. I saved it all to a hidden cloud folder. Backed it up twice. Daniel from Legal Aid told me, "Document everything. Facts keep you safe." That same week, Ryan Brooks, my manager at the grocery store, noticed I was working extra hard, eating the same $1 lunch every day, and offered me extra shifts. He wasn't nosy, just kind. "You're dependable," he said. "We could use someone like you a few more hours a week. You in? I said yes so fast he laughed. The new hours helped. I finally had a predictable income. But the extra time at work meant even less time for homework. I started falling behind again. Mrs. Carter noticed and didn't scold me. She just sat me down and said, "Okay. Let's adjust the plan." We moved things around. Added study breaks during lunch. Set alarms. For the first time, it felt like someone was on my team. At home, though, the war never stopped. 3 nights later, Dad cornered me in the driveway after work. He found out somehow that I qualified for free lunch at school. He was livid. "You're telling the whole world we're broke?" he spat. "What kind of daughter goes around painting her parents as bums?" I didn't respond. I tried to go around him, but he stepped in front of me. That's when I saw it. Across the street, Mrs. Parker's porch light flicked on. She stepped outside, arms crossed, watching. Dad noticed too. His voice dropped. He hissed something about disrespect and embarrassing the family, then stormed inside. I stood there for a moment, shaking. Then I crossed the street and knocked on Mrs. Parker's door. She opened it like she'd been waiting, and just said, "You okay?" I nodded. But I wasn't. Not really. The mower incident hadn't even happened yet. And when it did, it broke something in me I didn't even know was still holding on. It was Saturday morning when I found it. My mower, my main piece of equipment, my livelihood, was sitting in the middle of the front yard, soaked through from an overnight storm. The thing was practically destroyed. I froze. I hadn't left it there. I never left it there. I always stored it in the garage, away from the weather, away from my parents' reach. But the car was gone from the driveway, and the garage door was open. They'd moved it. When they came back, Mom acted surprised. "Oh, that? We just needed room for the car last night. We didn't know it was going to rain. They lived in that house for 20 years, they always knew when it was going to rain." I crouched next to the mower, wiping water from the engine, trying not to cry. But when I pulled the cord and heard the lifeless cough of a flooded motor, my throat closed up. That machine had paid for every pencil, every pair of shoes, every meal that kept me going. And now it was gone. Mrs. Parker noticed me out there an hour later. She didn't ask questions. She just said, "Bring everything else to my garage. Right now." So I did. My trimmer, my leaf blower, my head shears, everything that was still mine. She cleared space on her shelves, set up hooks for the tools, even found a tarp for the broken mower. And then she handed me a key. "Keep this. From now on, your stuff stays here." That key felt like armor. A week later, Ryan Brooks, my grocery store manager, called me into his office. "You've been solid, Mia," he said. "We're making you part-time. Guaranteed hours, slight pay bump." Sound good? It sounded like everything. Stability. Safety. My own money, clean and predictable. But when things started looking up for me, my parents seemed to spiral deeper. Dad found out someone at church knew about the letter. Maybe it was gossip. Maybe Mrs. Parker mentioned something without realizing it. Either way, he came home raging, accusing me of turning the neighborhood against us. He slammed cabinets, shouted about how no one respects this family anymore. Mom cried, swearing she didn't tell anyone. It was chaos all over again. I stayed in my room, documenting at all times, dates, what was said. Daniel from legal aid had told me, if they retaliate, keep records. The next morning, Mrs. Carter pulled me aside at school. "Your parents agreed to a mediation meeting with me and a district social worker," she said. "We'll talk everything through calmly." Calmly. That was the goal. The meeting was on a Wednesday. We sat around a long conference table under fluorescent lights, me, my parents, Mrs. Carter, and the social worker, Ms. Kim. My parents went first. They accused me of being rude, secretive, selfish. They said I was ungrateful and too influenced by outside voices. Ms. Kim listened quietly and then asked, "What basic support do you currently provide for Mia?" The silence that followed was painful. After a few seconds, Dad muttered, "We give her a place to live." Ms. Kim nodded. "What about food? Clothing? School supplies?" Mom's eyes flicked toward me. We used to, but she prefers to handle those things herself." "That's not what she described," Ms. Kim said gently. I explained everything, what I paid for, what they refused to buy, what had happened with the rent demand. My voice didn't shake. For once, I wasn't scared. When I finished MS, Kim took a deep breath and said, Here's what we're going to do. She drafted a temporary agreement: no rent until I turned 17, regular household chores in exchange for basic access to food, and a guarantee that I wouldn't be harassed about money. She printed it, made us all sign, and gave each of us a copy. It wasn't freedom, but it was a shield. That night, my parents didn't speak to me. They didn't even look at me. But when I went to bed, I put that paper in a folder under my pillow. And for the first time in months, I slept without fear that I'd wake up to find my things thrown on the lawn. It was temporary peace. And like everything in that house, it wouldn't last. A week after mediation, I came home from school to find my dad loading his golf clubs into a stranger's car. He sold them right there in the driveway. No eye contact. No words. Just took the money and went inside. Later, I saw him counting it at the kitchen table, muttering about paying off a credit card before they got sued. That week, no one asked me for money, which felt like progress. Mom surprised me by getting a part-time retail job at the mall. After her first shift, she came home complaining about sore feet and rude customers, but she was working. We started having cheap homemade dinners: rice, spaghetti, beans. Not glamorous, but real food. For the first time in years, I sat at the table with them and didn't feel like an outsider. One night, while doing dishes, Mom muttered, "My parents were strict with money too. Maybe too strict." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest she'd come to explaining herself. It didn't fix anything. But it meant, maybe she saw me. Just a little. Then I saw the cable bill sitting open on the kitchen counter. Highlighted at the bottom, $187.46. I knew that number. It meant they'd reinstated Dad's premium sports package. The same luxury they'd canceled during the emergency. I didn't say anything. I just walked back to my room with that old, hot weight in my chest. A day later, they were screaming at each other over the bank account. Dad blamed Mom's Target shopping. Mom blamed his bar tab. 45 minutes of shouting, and not once did either of them take ownership. The next morning, Dad cornered me in the hallway. "The bills are getting too high. It's time you started contributing again." I pulled out my phone and calmly showed him a picture of our signed agreement from the mediation. His face went red. He walked off muttering, "Ungrateful." 2 days later, Mom tried rebranding it. "What if we called it chore credits instead of rent?" she said way too cheerfully. "Still no," I replied. She stormed off. Some habits die slow. A few days later, I was stocking shelves at work when I saw my dad storming through the automatic doors, eyes scanning for me like a missile locked on target. I barely had time to move before he was in front of me, shouting loud, "You're making us look like bad parents," he yelled. "Telling people lies, humiliating us at church, dragging our name through the dirt." Shoppers stopped and stared. My manager, Ryan Brooks, came out from the back, calm but firm. He stepped between us and said, "Sir, you need to leave." "Now." Dad tried to push past him. "I'm her father." Ryan didn't budge. "Then act like it. Leave or I'll call the police." Dad's face twisted, but he backed off, slammed the door so hard it bounced back open. I sank onto a step stool in the cereal aisle, shaking. Jessica, another manager, wrote an incident report on the spot. Ryan told me, "We've got your back. If he shows up again, we call the cops." No hesitation. After my shift, I went straight to Mrs. Carter's house. She had given me her address for emergencies. I told her everything. She didn't even hesitate. "That crosses the line," she said. "We're reporting this." The next morning, a woman named Ms. Donovan from Child Welfare called me. She scheduled a home visit for Thursday. When I told my parents, the house turned into a military camp. Mom deep cleaned like we were expecting royalty. Dad rehearsed lines in the mirror about how we've always supported her. But I didn't play along. When Ms. Donovan arrived, she talked to all three of us, then interviewed me alone. I showed her my budget notebook, the photos, the agreement from mediation. I told her everything. She nodded. "You've done everything right, Mia. And this? This is neglect. You were never crazy." She made it clear to my parents: no rent, no locked pantry, full access to food and basic necessities. Follow-up visits would happen. And just like that, the power shifted for good this time. Things didn't magically become loving. My parents still mumbled under their breath. Mom sighed every time she bought groceries. Dad canceled the sports package again bitterly. But the pantry stayed open. Food was in the fridge. No more threats of rent. Ms. Donovan kept coming back. Mrs. Carter checked in weekly. I had backup. I kept working. Saving. Planning. By 17, I moved in with a host family through a student transition program. I finished school, graduated early, and went straight into community college through dual enrollment. I'm 23 now, working full-time, 2 semesters from finishing my degree. I don't talk to my parents much. And honestly, that's okay. Because I learned how to survive. But more importantly, I learned that surviving isn't the same as living. And I'm finally starting to do the second one.